how the House of Valois literally dragged France back from the brink of destruction and laid the ultimate groundwork for royal absolutism. You know, when we think of French kings, we usually jump straight to those monarchs wielding absolute, unchecked power. But that massive state machinery, it wasn't built overnight. It was forged in the fires of near-total collapse by the Valois dynasty over 261 incredibly turbulent years.
So how exactly did a dying, fractured kingdom manage to forge the ultimate, absolute monarchy? It's honestly the ultimate phoenix from the ashes story. France in the 14th century was definitely not the unified powerhouse we know today. It was decentralized, totally divided, and frankly on the verge of being swallowed up entirely by rival powers. So how did they pull off this turnaround?
To track this massive 261-year transformation, we're going to follow this roadmap today. First, a fractured feudal kingdom. Second, surviving existential threats. Third, forging a centralized state. Fourth, the religious collapse. And finally, the absolutist legacy.
Okay, let's start with our baseline. Part 1, a fractured feudal kingdom. This is France in 1328, the highly decentralized world the Valois inherited.
So, in 1328, France was dealing with a dizzying succession crisis. The senior Capetian line had basically just vanished after a string of kings died without male heirs. And thanks to French Salic law, women were strictly prohibited from inheriting the throne. Now, over in England, King Edward III actually had a surprisingly strong direct claim. I mean, he was the grandson of the former French king, Philip IV. But the French nobles, yeah, they weren't having it. They backed Philip of Valois instead, pretty much just to avoid handing their kingdom over to a 15-year-old English kid.
The crucial thing to remember here is that those early Valois kings were largely trapped in Paris. Sure, they nominally ruled France, but out in the provinces, places like Brittany, Provence, Burgundy, those powerful regional lords were running the show as de facto independent states. Honestly, compared to a place like England at the time, France was incredibly decentralized. Which brings us to part 2, surviving existential threats. This is the crucible that nearly wiped the Valois off the map entirely.
Because King Edward III definitely didn't take that rejection lying down. In 1337, he kicked off what became the devastating 100 Years' War, which, by the way, actually dragged on for 116 years. And at first, it was a bloodbath for France. We're talking catastrophic disasters at Crécy in 1346 and Agincourt in 1415. But somehow, they pulled off this miraculous military comeback, finally securing a massive victory at the Battle of Castillon in 1453. But it wasn't just external threats they were dealing with. Right in the middle of this grueling war, the French King Charles VI started suffering from severe psychological instability. Around 1392, he began falling into these intense periods of delirium. It got so bad, he actually became convinced he was literally made of glass. He would wrap himself up in heavy blankets and take all these extreme precautions just so he wouldn't shatter. Absolutely wild.
And you really have to look at the stark contrast going on here. While the French crown was quite literally and figuratively fragile, their rivals, the Dukes of Burgundy, who were actually a cadet branch of the Valois family themselves, were thriving. They were expanding their territory into the Low Countries, gobbling up super wealthy trading hubs like Antwerp and Bruges. They even kicked off their own distinct Burgundian renaissance in the arts, patronizing guys like Jan van Eyck, all while the main French crown was just languishing in instability. All of this internal and external weakness hit rock bottom in 1420 with the devastating Treaty of Troyes. After getting crushed at Agincourt, the ailing Charles VI was actually forced to accept the English king, Henry V, as the rightful heir to the French throne. There was a very, very real chance, right then and there, that the House of Valois would be completely extinguished and France would just be swallowed whole by the English Plantagenets. But against all odds, they survived. Moving to part 3, forging a centralized state and turning the tide.
You see, winning the 100 Years' War in 1453 wasn't just a military victory. It was the ultimate centralizing catalyst. The crown started aggressively eating up its internal rivals. They took Aquitaine back from the English, and then a massive stroke of luck. The powerful Duke of Burgundy, Charles the Bold, dies in battle in 1477 without a male heir. Boom, the Burgundian threat is neutralized, and that core territory is absorbed right into the crown. Provence followed right after in 1481. The centralizing machine was running at full speed.
Fast forward to the 16th century, and King Francis I, who is arguably the ultimate Valois powerhouse, really hits the gas pedal on this state building. He snuffs out the independence of Brittany once and for all. Then he passes this absolute game-changer of a law in 1539, the Ordinance of Villers-Cotterets. He imposed universal laws and made the French language mandatory in all government and legal affairs, completely overriding local dialects. He was effectively hammering this patchwork kingdom into a single, unified whole. And Francis wasn't just centralizing laws, he was centralizing culture. After marching his armies into Italy, he brought the brilliant ideas of the Renaissance back north of the Alps. He lured all these incredible Italian humanists, architects, and masters, including Leonardo da Vinci himself, straight to his shiny new unified French court, essentially turning France into Europe's cultural superpower. But just as they reached those heights, things took a really dark turn. Part 4, the religious collapse, where the dynasty basically implodes. The kingdom fractured all over again, but this time it wasn't about feudal borders, it was about religion. The Protestant Reformation had exploded across the country, creating a massive population of French Protestants known as Huguenots. The Valois kings were completely stuck in the middle. They remained Catholic, sure, but they were being squeezed between ultra-zealous Catholic factions backed by the powerful House of Guise and heavily armed Protestant forces led by major nobles like Henry of Bourbon.
The absolute breaking point came in 1572 with the infamous St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. What was supposed to be a peaceful royal wedding to unite the two factions completely devolved into a horrific bloodbath in Paris that quickly spread across the country. Thousands were murdered. It was an absolute tragedy that permanently alienated any moderate thinkers from the Valois crown, plunging the whole realm right back into chaos. The dynasty finally burned itself out in this totally bizarre, incredibly bloody conflict known as the War of the Three Henrys. For 4 years, you had the reigning Valois king, Henry III, fighting the Protestant Henry of Bourbon and the Catholic Henry of Guise. The whole chaotic mess finally ended the Valois line forever in August 1589, when a Catholic fanatic named Jacques Clément successfully assassinated King Henry III.
So why does any of this matter to the wider scope of history? Let's look at part 5, the absolutist legacy and the Bourbon inheritance.
The Valois were dead, yes, but that incredible state machinery they built, it survived. The crown passed to the Protestant leader Henry of Bourbon, who became King Henry IV. Now, Henry was a pragmatist. He knew he had to heal this broken nation if he actually wanted to rule it, so he converted to Catholicism, supposedly dropping that famous line, "Paris is well worth a mass." He ended the religious wars in 1598, and in doing so, he inherited 2 centuries worth of hardcore Valois state building.
When you zoom out, you can really see this macro-historical progression. Step 1, the Valois survived the existential threat of the English. Step 2, they used that momentum to centralize the state, gobbling up those independent duchies and standardizing the law. And step 3, that exact centralization hands the new Bourbon dynasty the literal keys to absolute unquestioned power.
The Valois did all the heavy lifting. It was because they spent centuries crushing regional independence that later Bourbon kings, like the famous Louis XIV, could rule with absolute impunity. By the 17th century, France wasn't just a kingdom, it was a centralized titan, the most powerful country in Western Europe, requiring massive multi-nation alliances just to keep it in check. So I'm gonna leave you with this provocative thought from our explainer sources today. Were the Valois truly these brilliant architects who intentionally laid the groundwork for French royal absolutism, or were they just a relatively weak dynasty that managed to get lucky with a handful of exceptionally strong rulers? It's definitely something to chew on as you consider their massive 261-year legacy.